When I stepped out of the taxi and saw the empty front yard, I thought I'd come to the wrong house. The garden, my garden, looked stripped bare. The rose bushes I'd planted before my surgery were gone, the white picket fence leaned inward, and the mailbox had someone else's name crudely taped over ours. "Ma'am, are you okay?" the driver asked, watching me through the rear-view mirror. I nodded, but my throat refused to form words. How could I explain that this was my home, or at least it had been 3 weeks ago, before I'd gone into the hospital to have a tumor removed from my abdomen? The key in my hand trembled. I'd dreamed of this moment during recovery, coming home, sitting on our old beige sofa, smelling the faint lemon cleaner I always used, and hearing David call from the kitchen, "Honey, I made your favorite soup," but the door wouldn't open. My key no longer fit. I rang the bell. A strange woman's voice answered through the intercom. "Who is it?" My mouth went dry. This is Laura Thompson. This is my house." A pause. Then a curt reply. "I think you have the wrong address." My legs weakened. The driver offered to wait, but I waved him off. I had to see it for myself. I walked to the front window and pressed my hand against the glass. The curtains were new, gray, not the blue ones I'd picked. Inside, the furniture was different. Gone were the framed photos of our wedding and the kids at graduation. In their place sat minimalist art, a glass table, and a tall vase of lilies. Lilies. My husband knew I hated them. The realization hit me so suddenly I staggered. The door opened behind me, and a man stepped out. Our neighbor, Mr. Kent. His eyes widened when he saw me. "Laura? Oh, Lord, you're back. What's going on?" I whispered. "Why can't I get into my house?" He looked away. "David, he said you'd moved to Arizona for treatment. He said the house was sold. Sold." The word fell like a hammer. I laughed, soft, disbelieving. "Sold? While I was in surgery?" Mr. Kent's face turned pale. "I'm sorry, I thought you knew." I clutched the metal gate for balance. The world blurred. White walls of the new paint, the scent of lilies, my heartbeat drumming in my ears. Somewhere inside that house, a woman's silhouette moved past the living room window. Her hair was long and auburn, nothing like mine. David's mistress. I didn't scream. I didn't even cry. I just stood there until my knees gave out, and Mr. Kent helped me back to the curb. Flashback. Before the fall 2 months earlier, life had been ordinary. Maybe too ordinary. I used to wake before sunrise, open the curtains, and watch David get ready for work. He always wore pressed shirts, his tie slightly off-center until I fixed it. He'd smile and say, "What would I do without you, Laura?" We'd been married 22 years. We'd built this house together, literally. I'd chosen every color, every drawer handle. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. When I discovered I needed surgery, he was attentive at first, driving me to appointments, promising, "Don't worry about a thing. I'll handle the bills." Even then there were small signs. The phone he kept face down at dinner, the sudden gym membership, the way he said he needed more space to think. I blamed it on stress. Middle age makes people restless, I told myself. I'd been tired, moody, too focused on survival to notice how distant he'd become. The night before my surgery, he held my hand in the hospital bed. "You'll be fine," he whispered. "Just focus on getting better. I'll take care of everything." I remember smiling through the IV haze. "Promise me we'll still have the house when I get home." I couldn't recover anywhere else. He kissed my forehead. "You have my word." When the surgeon said the operation had gone well, I felt lighter. I texted David, but the messages went unanswered. He said he was busy with work whenever I called. Still, I didn't suspect betrayal. I just missed him. During those 3 weeks, I planned the meals I'd cook when I got back. Lemon chicken, his favorite. I asked the nurse to help me arrange a small surprise dinner for him. I even ordered new curtains online, navy blue, to replace the faded ones. How foolish that sounds now, because when I returned home, everything I thought I owned was gone, sold, replaced, rewritten. Mr. Kent drove me to a motel that night. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching my hospital discharge papers. My phone showed only silence from David. His number had been disconnected. I checked our joint bank account. 0 balance. Every savings transfer, every check, every credit line. Emptied. I whispered into the dim room. "What did you do, David?" Outside, rain started tapping against the window, slow and rhythmic, like a metronome marking the beat of my new, broken life. Morning after. The motel smelled of stale coffee and bleach. I stared at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above me and thought of the life I'd built disappearing in one clean sweep. My son, Kevin, called that morning from college. "Mom, how's the recovery?" I swallowed hard. "Better," I lied. "Just resting." I couldn't tell him. Not yet. Not until I knew why. By noon, I went to the county records office. The clerk handed me a copy of the property transfer. There it was in black and white. David Thompson as seller, Jessica Mills as buyer. Jessica. The name rang a faint bell. Then I remembered. His assistant from work, the one he mentioned helping with marketing reports. The sale date? 2 weeks ago. Signed while I was still in the hospital bed. I stared at my own forged signature, perfectly mimicked. The clerk frowned. "Are you saying this wasn't authorized?" I nodded slowly, feeling the first stirrings of something stronger than grief, rage. Cold, clear rage. "No," I said. It wasn't. That night I went back to the neighborhood. I parked down the street, hidden by the tall oaks. Through the window, I saw them, David and Jessica, laughing over takeout boxes in my kitchen. He poured wine into the glasses I'd bought for our anniversary. When she leaned over to kiss him, my hands tightened on the steering wheel. For 22 years, I'd built a life around trust, and in 3 weeks he'd torn it apart. But the part that hurt most wasn't losing the house. It was realizing he'd sold the very thing that had my soul in its walls, and in that moment, as headlights passed and the rain blurred their silhouettes, I knew this wasn't where my story would end, it was where it would begin. A few weeks after my surgery, life was supposed to fall back into rhythm. The doctor had cleared me for light work. I could finally drive again, make my own tea, water the garden, but something about the house felt foreign. It wasn't just the subtle rearranging of things, though that was the first thing I noticed. The living room rug was missing. The wall clock was gone. My framed wedding photo, the one with Daniel grinning nervously beside me on our honeymoon, wasn't on the mantel anymore. When I asked him, he barely looked up from his phone. "Oh, I just did a little tidying," he said. "You've been through enough. I didn't want you stressing about clutter." But that clock had hung there for 20 years. I could still remember the day we bought it from a flea market, haggling over $2 while he laughed and told the vendor I was impossible to resist. Now, it was just gone. I brushed it off. Maybe he was trying to make things easier for me. But little things kept shifting. The couch was pushed a little closer to the window. The curtains were new, different shade, heavier fabric. The plates in the kitchen cupboards were rearranged. It felt as if I was walking into someone else's house every morning. Then came the mail. A thick envelope. sealed and stamped with our address, but a different name printed beneath mine. Miss R. Linton. I thought it was a mistake. Maybe the previous tenant, though we'd owned the house for decades. When I asked Daniel, he froze for a second, so quickly I might have missed it if I hadn't been looking right at him. Probably just junk mail, he said, snatching it from my hand. You shouldn't be opening other people's letters anyway. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of the refrigerator hum was louder than usual, and every time the house creaked, I flinched. Daniel's breathing beside me was steady, peaceful, too peaceful. At around midnight, I went downstairs to get some water. That's when I noticed the faint glow spilling from under his office door. The computer screen was on. Daniel never left his computer on. I hesitated, then walked closer. The glow reflected off the hallway floor like moonlight on glass. My hand was trembling as I turned the handle. There, on the desk, was a printed document. I leaned closer, squinting under the dim blue light. Property sale agreement. Preliminary transfer. I froze. My name wasn't on the document. Only his, and there it was again. That name, Miss Rebecca Linton. The air in my chest vanished. I heard the stairs creak behind me. Laura? His voice came soft, careful. I turned slowly, my heart pounding. He stood there in the doorway, wearing that same calm, disarming smile. Couldn't sleep? He asked. What is this? My voice barely came out. I pointed at the paper. He looked at it for a moment, then gave a small chuckle. You really shouldn't snoop through my things. I asked you a question. It's business, he said flatly, moving past me to close the document folder. You wouldn't understand. It's just some refinancing paperwork. Refinancing. Without me? Without my name? I wanted to believe him. I told myself maybe he was reorganizing our mortgage to save money. Maybe there was some explanation. But in my gut, something felt off. The next day, I quietly called our real estate agent, Ellen, an old friend from church. Ellen, it's Laura, I said. Can you check something for me? I think Daniel's making some changes to the house papers. There was a pause. Laura, are you sure you want me to look? She asked gently. Yes, I said. Please. A few minutes later, she called back. Laura, I don't know how to tell you this, she whispered. The house has been listed for private sale. It's already under contract. I nearly dropped the phone. Under contract? What does that mean? It means someone's buying it, and Daniel's the sole seller on record. My mouth went dry. That's impossible. My name's on the deed. It was, she said. It isn't anymore. The room began to spin. He had sold it. Our house, the one we built together, brick by brick, painting the porch every spring, planting the lavender by the gate. He had taken it, and my name, away. That evening, I waited for him. The sun sank behind the maple trees, staining the kitchen walls with a tired orange glow. When he walked in, his tie loose and his face blank, I asked in a trembling voice, Why, Daniel? He didn't even pretend to misunderstand. He just sighed, running a hand through his hair. I did what I had to do, he said. You were gone for months, Laura. Everything was falling apart. The bills, the house repairs, your medical costs. Someone had to make decisions. You sold our home, I whispered. Our home? He repeated, laughing bitterly. You mean the place that drained us dry? The one you insisted we keep even when it was killing us financially? I shook my head. That's not what this is about. Who is she, Daniel? His silence told me everything. A tear slipped down my cheek, but I didn't let my voice waver. You brought her here, didn't you? While I was in the hospital? He didn't answer. Her name's Rebecca, isn't it? The sound of his breath catching was all the confirmation I needed. He tried to speak, but I turned away. I couldn't bear to look at him. All the years, the quiet mornings, the laughter, the struggles, evaporated like steam. That night, I packed a single suitcase and went to stay at my sister's house. I didn't cry, not yet. Not until the next morning when I saw the news headline online. Local property sold for record price. New owner to move in next week. My house. My life. Gone. But as I stared at the photo, something hardened inside me. He thought he'd taken everything. He was wrong, because I still had my name. My will. And a story that wasn't finished yet. The days that followed blurred together. A quiet storm raging behind every polite nod I gave my sister, every fake smile I managed at breakfast. At night, when she was asleep, I sat on the porch staring into the darkness, my fingers twisting the thin gold band I'd worn for nearly 28 years. It had once meant partnership, trust. Now it just felt like a lie. I thought of confronting him again, of screaming, of demanding the truth. But there was a strange strength in my silence, the kind of strength that grows from something broken but still breathing. Instead, I started to observe. I drove by our old house one afternoon, parking far enough down the street that he wouldn't notice. A moving van was already in the driveway. And then I saw her, a tall woman with sleek brown hair and an effortless smile, the kind of smile that didn't belong to someone unpacking boxes, but to someone who'd already made herself at home. She wore my garden gloves, my apron. She was standing exactly where I used to stand, trimming the roses Daniel and I planted on our 10th anniversary. My chest tightened. Then Daniel walked out. He leaned in and kissed her. Not a guilty kiss, not a stolen one, a practiced, public one. As if they'd been doing it for years. I remember the way my breath hitched, the sound escaping me like something wounded. I clutched the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. He wasn't just cheating. He was replacing me. The next morning, I called Ellen again. "Who bought the house?" I asked. Her voice faltered. "Laura, I shouldn't—" "Please, I deserve to know." There was a long pause, then a quiet sigh. "It's registered under R. Linton." I let out a humorless laugh. "Rebecca." "Yes," she said softly. "Rebecca Linton. Cash purchase. Daniel handled everything privately." Cash. He'd always claimed we were broke, that the hospital bills had ruined us. But if there was cash, that meant there'd been money hidden somewhere. And then it hit me. The savings account. The one we'd built together over 2 decades. The one he swore he'd closed to pay for my medical costs. He hadn't closed it. He'd stolen it. I felt a numb calm wash over me, the kind that comes right before a storm. I spent the next few days piecing together what had happened. Every timeline, every inconsistency, every word he'd said that now felt laced with deceit. The surgery. That's when it started. I'd been bedridden for weeks, medicated, groggy. He'd handled all the paperwork, told me not to worry about anything. He'd even asked for my ID for insurance updates. He hadn't needed it for insurance. He'd used it to transfer the house deed to his name alone. The betrayal wasn't impulsive. It was calculated. That night, I wrote everything down, every date, every statement, every message. I gathered what documents I still had. Old mortgage statements, bank receipts, photos, and then I did what Daniel never expected me to do. I called a lawyer. Mr. Hardy was an old friend of my father's, quiet, serious, and patient in a way that made me feel safe. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, taking slow notes. When I finished, his expression was unreadable. "Laura," he said finally, "this is ugly, but not hopeless." "Can I get my house back?" I asked. He shook his head gently. "Not exactly. Once property changes hands under a clean sale, it's very difficult. But we can go after your share of the assets. And if your husband forged or coerced your signature, that's fraud." Fraud. The word tasted bitter and heavy. Mr. Hardy leaned forward. "Do you have any proof he took money from your joint account without consent?" I nodded slowly. "I think I can get it." That became my focus. For the first time in months, I had a purpose again. I contacted the bank. They were hesitant at first, privacy laws, security checks, but I still had enough identification to access joint history. And there it was, transfer after transfer, from our account to one under Rebecca Linton's name. Thousands of dollars at a time. Over the course of 8 months, he had drained nearly every cent we had. When I printed the statements and laid them across my kitchen table, it hit me fully. My husband hadn't just cheated. He had erased me financially, emotionally, legally. But he had left a trail. The next week, Mr. Hardy and I filed the first motion, a claim for fraudulent transfer of joint marital assets. I didn't tell Daniel. I wanted him to be comfortable, to believe I was broken, too meek to fight. But then came the moment I wasn't prepared for. He showed up at my sister's house. I was in the garden, trimming her tulips, when I heard the familiar sound of his car door slam. That deep, gravelly sound of his boots on the driveway. He still had that same confident stride, as if the world bent for him. "Laura," he called, his tone disarmingly soft. "Can we talk?" I straightened up slowly. "About what? The weather?" He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, things got complicated. I made mistakes, all right. But selling the house, it wasn't just for me. I thought you'd understand someday." "Understand what?" I asked quietly. "That you sold my life while I was in a hospital bed?" He took a step closer. "It wasn't like that. I didn't know how to tell you." "Rebecca, Rebecca," I repeated, the word like ash on my tongue. "Say her name again, and I'll call the police." He hesitated, then changed tactics. "You can't live like this, Laura. You're better off letting it go. I'll make sure you're taken care of." "Taken care of?" I whispered. "You took everything." He opened his mouth again, but something in my eyes must have stopped him. He backed away slowly, muttering under his breath. That was the last time I saw him in person. When he finally got the legal notice 2 weeks later, he tried to call me 15 times in one night. I didn't answer. The next morning, I received a short message from an unknown number. "You'll regret this. You're ruining both our lives." I deleted it, because by then I'd realized something. He was right. I was ruining our life. But it wasn't mine anymore. It was his. And he was about to learn what that felt like. In the weeks that followed, I felt a strange clarity I hadn't known in years. The kind of quiet strength that comes when you have nothing left to lose. My mornings no longer began with dread. I woke up, brewed my tea, and watched the sunrise from my sister's kitchen window, the same spot where I'd once sat in tears. Now I took deep breaths instead. I wrote everything down in a leather notebook, details of calls, timelines, dates, names. Mr. Hardy said documentation was power. And I believed him. Daniel, however, did not. He thought I was still the same woman he could manipulate with a soft voice and a half apology. He had no idea how much I'd changed. Mr. Hardy's firm began digging into Daniel's finances. Within weeks, they found evidence of not only fraudulent transfers, but also forged signatures on the house deed. The notary confirmed she'd only met Daniel, never me. That meant he'd faked my authorization entirely. Fraud, full stop. When Mr. Hardy told me, I sat perfectly still, my hand hovering over the teacup. "Will he go to jail?" "Possibly," he said. "But the real goal is recovery, your half of the assets, maybe even damages." I nodded, but deep down, I didn't care about the money anymore. I wanted him to face himself, to look in the mirror and see the man who'd traded love for convenience. When the court summons was officially served, Rebecca's name appeared beside his. My lawyer had included her in the filing for knowingly receiving stolen assets. Apparently, she'd been listed as his business partner in a fake renovation company, the one used to launder our savings. For a few days, I allowed myself to imagine their faces when they opened the envelope. I pictured him pacing the kitchen, my kitchen, muttering about how unfair it was. I pictured her, the woman with the perfect hair and perfect smile, realizing the comfortable nest she'd moved into was built on fraud. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. Still, a part of me mourned the man I'd loved. Not Daniel, the fraud, but the version of him who once brought me daisies after my first teaching job, who cried at our son's graduation. That man was gone long before I realized it. I had to make peace with that. When the preliminary hearing date came, I stood in the courthouse lobby, my palms clammy despite the cool air. Rebecca was there, sitting a few rows behind Daniel. She avoided my eyes, though I could feel her stare burning into me. Daniel, on the other hand, looked smaller, thinner. His confidence had withered into nervous gestures, tapping his knee, biting his lip, adjusting his tie. For a brief, shameful moment, I pitied him until he smirked. That smirk, that same arrogant curl of the mouth he used whenever he thought he'd won. "Ready for your little show, Laura?" he whispered as I passed. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. My silence was my armor now. Inside the courtroom, Mr. Hardy laid everything out methodically: transfers, deeds, timelines, screenshots. The evidence was undeniable. When the judge asked if I wanted to speak, I rose slowly, my voice steady. "Your Honor," I began, "I trusted a man with my life. While I was recovering from surgery, learning how to walk again, he sold the only home we'd ever known. He took our savings and built another life, while I lay in a hospital bed thinking he loved me." A hush fell over the room. I swallowed the lump in my throat. This isn't about revenge. It's about fairness. It's about what's right. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his lawyer whispering in his ear. I caught a glimpse of his hands trembling. When it was his turn, he stood and started with his usual charm. "Your Honor, my wife is exaggerating. She wasn't capable of handling finances after her surgery, and I—" Mr. Hardy interrupted. "And that's why you forged her signature, Mr. Linton?" The silence that followed was deafening. The judge's expression hardened. You'll have a chance to answer that under oath." Rebecca looked away. By the time the session ended, I felt lighter. It wasn't over, not yet, but the tide had turned. Outside, the sun was just beginning to set, casting a golden light on the courthouse steps. I took it as a sign, maybe of endings, maybe of beginnings. Mr. Hardy walked beside me. "He'll try to settle," he said. "Mark my words. He'll want this to disappear quietly. Will we let him?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Only if you want to." I thought about that long and hard that night, when the call came 3 days later, Daniel's voice trembling through the phone. I was ready. "Laura," he began, "let's not drag this through court. I'll transfer you your share, half of what's left." I took a slow breath. "Half of what's left, Daniel? You sold everything behind my back. You drained our savings. You took my name off our home. What's left to split?" He hesitated. "Don't do this. Please. You're ruining both of us." "No," I said quietly. "You did that. I'm just finally telling the truth." He went silent. Then, almost whispering, "You're stronger than I remember." That made me smile. A small, sad smile. "No, Daniel. I was always strong. You just never noticed." I hung up. For the first time in months, I felt completely still inside. The next morning, I called Mr. Hardy and told him to reject the settlement. I wanted everything the law would allow, not out of greed, but because I deserved to stand on solid ground again, not the ashes of someone else's lies. Over the next few weeks, the case gained quiet traction. Word spread in our small town. People whispered in grocery aisles. Neighbors stared from behind curtains. Daniel stopped showing up to his usual cafe. Rebecca left town. The life they'd built together was unraveling. And me? I started living again. I found a small apartment near the library where I used to volunteer. I began teaching part-time, creative writing for women over 50. On the first day, I told them, "Stories can save you. Sometimes telling yours is how you take your life back." They nodded. Some cried, so did I. But healing isn't linear. There were nights I still woke up reaching for the other side of the bed, half expecting to hear Daniel's soft snore. Mornings when I'd smell coffee brewing and for a split second, forget I was alone. But those moments faded, replaced by something steadier. Peace. I didn't need revenge anymore. I had something better, self-respect. The day the judgment came down was colder than I expected for early spring. A sharp wind swept through the courthouse steps as I arrived. The kind that bites your cheeks and wakes you up all over again. Mr. Hardy met me by the doors. His briefcase tucked under one arm, that same calm expression he always wore before delivering news that could change a life. Inside, the courtroom buzzed quietly. Reporters from the local paper sat in the back row, their pens poised. A few townspeople whispered, recognizing Daniel and Rebecca. In a place as small as ours, gossip traveled faster than truth ever could. When Daniel walked in, his once perfect posture was gone. His suit hung loose, his eyes sunken. Rebecca wasn't beside him this time. She'd filed for separation weeks earlier when his accounts were frozen. He wouldn't look at me. I didn't need him to. The hearing was short. All the arguments had been made, all the evidence laid bare. The judge spoke clearly, without emotion. Mr. Daniel Linton is found liable for fraudulent transfer of marital assets, falsification of property documents, and intentional concealment of funds. The court orders restitution of the misappropriated amount to Mrs. Laura Linton, as well as compensatory damages for emotional distress. It sounded clinical, but it landed like thunder in my chest. Daniel's head fell forward. His lawyer murmured something I couldn't hear, and then it was over. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just stood there, breathing, steady, whole. As I stepped outside, a light drizzle began to fall. Raindrops collected on my coat, mingling with tears I hadn't realized were there. Mr. Hardy touched my shoulder gently. "It's done," he said. I nodded. "Yes, it is." News spread fast. Within days, the town's gossip networks turned Daniel's perfect husband image into a cautionary tale. People who once envied our marriage whispered apologies when they saw me. Some offered sympathy, others shared their own stories of betrayal, quiet confessions in grocery aisles and at the post office. But the most surprising thing happened a week later. I was having coffee at a small diner downtown when a young woman approached me nervously. She couldn't have been more than 25. "Mrs. Linton?" she asked softly. "Yes?" She fidgeted with her purse strap. I just wanted to say thank you." "What you did?" "Taking him to court. Standing up for yourself. My mom's been going through something similar. You gave her courage." I blinked, taken aback. "I didn't think anyone would even notice," she smiled. They did. After she left, I sat there for a long time, staring at the rain-streaked window. For the first time, I realized something important. The story wasn't just about me losing my house or my husband. It was about reclaiming my voice, and maybe, by telling it, I was helping others find theirs too. Daniel didn't go to prison. The judge granted him probation, citing restitution efforts, but his reputation was gone. His business collapsed within months. Clients withdrew, his so-called partners distanced themselves, and Rebecca? She resurfaced briefly, moving to another town. I heard through the grapevine that she tried to sell some of the furniture from my old house, the same pieces she'd once bragged about redecorating. But she didn't get far. The house itself was repossessed to pay restitution. I never went back there. It didn't feel like home anymore. Home, I realized, wasn't a building. It was peace, and I finally had that. One afternoon, about 2 months after the verdict, I received a letter. The handwriting was unmistakable, neat, slanted, a little tired. It was from Daniel. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time before opening it. "Laura, I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted to say I understand now. Losing you wasn't the punishment. Living with myself is. I see you everywhere, in the way the garden used to bloom, in the smell of coffee in the morning, in the silence after dinner. I traded something sacred for something shallow, and I'll never make peace with that. I hope you find happiness, even if it's far from me, Daniel." My hands trembled as I folded the letter. Forgiveness didn't come rushing in. It never does. But in that moment, I realized I didn't need revenge anymore. His regret was its own kind of justice. I slipped the letter into my drawer, beside the divorce decree and the court order, not as a keepsake, but as proof that even the deepest wounds could one day scar over. Spring turned to summer. My little apartment filled with light and warmth. I started tending a small garden on the balcony. Nothing like the roses Daniel and I once had, but simple herbs, daisies, and lavender. Sometimes, as I watered the plants, I caught myself smiling at how life had quietly rebuilt itself. I began writing again. Essays, short stories, reflections, Mr. Hardy's. Niece, a filmmaker, read one of my pieces online and asked if she could adapt it for a short documentary about women reclaiming their lives after betrayal. When I watched the finished version months later, hearing my own voice narrate those first words, He sold our house while I was in the hospital. I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't pain anymore. It was purpose. The documentary quietly gained attention. Comments poured in from women around the world, strangers who understood, who had lived their own versions of my story. Each message felt like a small thread weaving me back into the world, and that's when I knew. What Daniel took was temporary. What I regained was lasting. By the following autumn, I'd bought a modest cottage just outside town. White shutters, a little garden, and a porch swing that creaked gently in the wind. When my sister came to visit, she said, "It feels like you again." I smiled. "No," I told her. "It feels like who I was meant to be." That night, as I sat on the porch wrapped in a shawl, the stars glimmering faintly above, I thought about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the pain, the courtrooms, the endless tears. And then I thought about how I'd survived it all, not as a victim, but as a woman who learned that sometimes losing everything is how you finally find yourself. It's been 3 years since that stormy afternoon when the judge restored what was rightfully mine. 3 years since I learned that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers quietly and lets time do the rest. I don't think about Daniel every day anymore. When I do, it's not with anger, more with a kind of distant curiosity, like remembering a book I once read but no longer feel connected to. There's peace in that. The little cottage I bought has become my sanctuary. Every morning, the sunlight creeps through lace curtains and lands on the dining table where my teacup waits, chipped, familiar, and perfect. I read the newspaper, water the plants, and talk to the birds as if they understand. Maybe they do. The air smells of mint and lavender. My hands are always a bit stained with soil, and I love it that way. Sometimes I still get letters from women who watched the documentary or who read one of my essays online. One from a woman named Claire said, "Your story saved me. I was afraid to leave my husband after he gambled away our savings. I didn't think I could start over at 55. But then I heard you say, I didn't lose everything. I found freedom. That line changed me. I cried when I read that. Not because it was sad, but because it reminded me how sharing your truth can quietly become someone else's survival guide. I visit the town sometimes, though less now. People greet me differently, not as Daniel's wife, but simply as Laura. That name finally belongs to me again. At the farmer's market last month, I saw Rebecca. She looked older, thinner. She hesitated before walking over. "Laura," she said softly, her voice smaller than I remembered. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, for everything." I studied her for a long moment. I saw no manipulation this time, no smugness, just weariness. I nodded. "I believe you." She blinked, surprised. "You do?" "Yes," I said quietly, "because I learned something. Forgiveness isn't about giving someone a free pass. It's about freeing yourself from their shadow." Her eyes welled up. She whispered, "Thank you," and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I never saw her again. And somehow, that was enough. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, I sat on my porch with a notebook open across my lap. A blank page stared back at me, waiting. I picked up my pen and began to write, "Some betrayals don't destroy you. They deliver you. Some endings aren't tragic. They're beginnings disguised as loss." I paused, smiling. Those words weren't just sentences. They were lessons carved from the deepest cracks in my heart. If you'd told me back then that I would ever be grateful for the day he sold our house, I would have laughed bitterly. But now I understand. That loss forced me to rebuild not walls, but wings. It made me stronger, wiser, softer. Too, I started volunteering at a local shelter for women rebuilding their lives after abuse and abandonment. I don't tell my full story often, just enough to let them know they're not alone. Sometimes one of them will ask, "Do you ever stop feeling angry?" And I'll smile, a little sadly, and answer, "Yes." The anger fades the moment you start loving yourself more than you hate what happened. Life has a strange way of teaching you what truly matters. It isn't the house, or the money, or the people who promise forever. It's the peace you feel when you close your eyes at night, knowing you've survived every storm that tried to break you. One winter morning, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a photo of my old home. It had been sold again, freshly painted. The garden blooming. On the back, in small handwriting, were just 3 words. "It's yours again." I don't know if it was Daniel who sent it, or the realtor, or fate's strange sense of poetry, but I didn't go back. I didn't need to. Because home, I realized long ago, isn't a place you return to. It's the peace you carry forward. Tonight, as I sit here writing, the wind hums softly against the window panes. The kettle whistles, and the smell of chamomile fills the air. I think about all the versions of me that had to fall apart to become this one. The trusting wife, the broken woman, the quiet fighter, the survivor, the storyteller. And I whisper to her, to all of them, "Thank you for holding on." If you're listening right now, maybe you've been through your own kind of betrayal, or loss, or heartbreak that shattered your sense of safety. I want you to remember this. You are not what was done to you. You are what you chose to do after. Pain will visit, yes. It always does. But so will healing, if you let it, and sometimes life will take everything just to show you how strong you truly are without it. As the clock ticks softly in the corner, I close my notebook, set down my pen, and whisper the words that carried me through it all. He sold our house while I was in the hospital. But he didn't sell my strength. He didn't sell my worth. And he'll never own my peace again. Fade out. Soft piano plays as her silhouette sits by the window, moonlight catching the silver strands in her hair. Her eyes close, calm, content, free.